Good heavens, a lot of people watched that last video, much more than I would expect. Anyhow, this is part two of what happens when you meditate for 10 to 16 hours a day for 5 months straight. And you can hop in right here. There's somewhat of a sequence, but you'll be able to follow. But you may want to watch the first one at some point because there'll probably be things that speak to each other. And it's a little bit arbitrary and artificial for me to separate these things out into 5 videos, but here we go. This one, healing, energetics. We may get into some of the kundalini, although in my teacher training itself, that was not a dominant thing for me. That had happened already in life in a very gentle way. So straight up, now I'll paint a picture for you. And this is some of the favorite periods of being in that long retreat. And essentially it was either sitting in my chair or lying in my bed, which was actually a nice way to be able to do a meditation training. But it was as if I was 40 feet down below a surface, 40 feet, 100 feet, whatever. It's all very arbitrary. Way, way down below the noisy surface of the mind. Just completely relaxed in a completely absorbing silence. And sometimes edging up out of it a little bit, edging back down into it, coming out, not even coming out into thought linguistically as we'd think, more like proto-thought, proto-impulses, really, in that very subtle space. Including in some of that subtle space, I might call it the archetypal dimension of life, because you creatives can really, really enjoy being in that space. I think that space is where the White Album came from, as a matter of fact, when the Beatles were in Rishikesh in 1968. But anyways, I digress. Just spending weeks, months even of that, collectively in that space, and watching what was going on in my body, watching what was going on, we might say, in my psyche, in my emotions. And it was just being in that space and having the sense of sometimes a thousand, tiny little beings cleaning up all sorts of mess. Sometimes one being, if I could have, in my life, if I could ever say I felt like I was healed by the hands of divinity, that would be one of the times. Of course, I was 19 and 20, so honestly, there wasn't that much to heal with me. I was in fairly good, real good shape at the time, but there was lots of emotional stuff. Lots of stuff that needed to be loosened, untied, and it just felt like, if you could imagine that you've been walking around your life and in a straitjacket or like a corset or with a bunch of strings tied tightly around you, and you had no idea that they were there. And you only find out that they were there when you're down in this deep silence, and all of a sudden they start coming off. That's a pretty good way of describing the sensation. And boy, and for me, now other people have different experiences. For me, it was fairly easy. There wasn't a whole lot of resistance. A lot of the heavier stuff that I could have faced, I encountered beforehand, when I was doing more like a normal working life, but still doing like 4 hours a day of meditation and living in an ashram, and having a lot of intense situations come up that seemed to be designed to push my buttons, all of them. And that was hard. That was much more difficult. I had a lot of that beforehand. So when I got to this training, for the most part, there was some stuff I was resisting, absolutely. And there were some things some levels of trauma and pain and tension that I just, no matter how deep I went, I don't think I was going to get to. That needed to come maybe 8 years later or 13 years later or whatever. Just, we're built like onions. Just remember that in terms of where our tensions are placed. So, massive healing. And I in my meditation classes, one of the things that I go on about with people, mainly because when people get really serious about meditation, if they're doing a path that's fairly effective to them, they might notice that they're having many, many more thoughts than usual. Or they are having just tons of emotional energy come up. Comfortable, sometimes very uncomfortable, whatever. And it's a very easy thing for a person to think, oh, this is not good, this is not working, or whatever, because we have it in our minds. Often we get ideas about, well, I need to be basically completely silent all the time, and walking a foot above the ground or whatever, and unaffected, etc., etc. Equanimity, all these words people get, and projections. And no. So a point I harp on about is that actually often it's a sign that things are going quite well, especially the increase of thought and emotional energy. The fact of the matter is, most of us have a ton of stuff. Even if we had an easy life, a short, easy life like mine was, most of us have dumped stuff into these bodies of ours. Okay? And when the mind starts to experience the vastness of samadhi, and starts to enjoy that really profound peace, and that immersion, and that just melting into that space, that's wonderful. But then the body settles down into really, really deep rest. I mean, the transcendental meditation people say, my own Ishia's Ascension people would say, well, twice as deep as the deepest sleep at night. And there's always, people are like, are those measurements accurate, right? So put those sorts of claims aside. We'll just say subjectively extremely deep rest. So the body goes into the rest, and then it's the way I've always felt. It was like there are these work crews, these sort of self-healing work crews dormant in the body, that when I would go into those really deep states of physical relaxation, we're like, okay, he's out. Even though I'd be very conscious during this period, he's out. So now we can do what we've been meaning to do. There's a huge backlog. It goes back to third grade, or it goes back to age 4, or whatever it happens to be. And then they start going. And that can be quite something, and not always comfortable. So just remember that if you're a serious meditator and you've not been told that before, and it might be helpful. This was also one of the reasons why we were doing yoga twice a day. So mainly it would be like 12 sun salutations, and then after your sun salutations, do a round of asanas, and then go into shavasana, and then do a little bit of pranayama, and then go into your meditation twice a day, morning, evening. And that was very helpful, because actually if I never really skipped at that time, did I? Probably did. Anyways, if I skipped, like say I remember skipping after my teacher training, I would feel like I'd been hit by a Mack truck, and so it became very evident how much good work that yoga was doing to help move this stuff, help the body process all of this built up stuff. So the healing could be immense. Now this is an anecdote, and my friend who this is about, that she just passed away, but I do remember her hair, and I probably shouldn't share this, maybe irresponsible. I remember she was like 67 at the time, 67-year-old Hong Kong-born Catholic nun who came to be in our meditation teacher training. Wonderful, dear friend of mine. She had a little bit of streak of gray hair, and it turned black again. I don't know how come. Maybe that's very common, so I shouldn't be banding around this anecdote of, oh, look at this. But that was fascinating. Seeing all these people get improved vision, that's been fascinating too. That has not come to my door. I'll put it that way. My vision is not that great. It didn't improve from that. So anyways, I'll move beyond that, because there's the healing opens up into other things. Healing also concurrently turns into what I might call optimization. That came a lot for me in the practice. One, I can say, where there's silence, deep silence. And this is, again, silence does not mean absence of sound or absence of cognition or absence of thought. It's something fundamental underneath everything. It's that space which gives rise to everything. So where there's that, there's love. It just comes out. Like, or another thing way I used to put it is, if we could give a name to the nameless and a form to the formless, we couldn't do better than using the word love. And so, God, the I don't think of myself as like a ecstatic or a bhakti, type person. But wow, the sense of being still, sitting in the chair, or laying in the bed, or propped up, or wherever I happen to be in shavasana, waves and waves of bliss, moving in, around, through, up and down, into the body, of like the most wonderful massage could possibly be. That's certainly played a part in our tradition, which is sort of downstream of transcendental meditation. We had this wonderful translation and commentary of the Rig Veda that would just had around, and we listened to it every night as well. Well, at a certain point, we listened to the Rig Veda quite a bit, and the Rig Veda goes on about it. Especially we listened to the ninth chapter, otherwise known as the ninth mandala. The ninth mandala is all about this substance called Soma. So it's the main, in a way you could say it's the main character of the ninth mandala, Soma Pavamana, self-purifying Soma. And, of course, I think there might be a lot of merit to the way that scholars over the past 100 years have thought of Soma more as like an exogenous psychedelic brew. I'm totally open to that being part of it. However, the way we were presented with Soma was it's this molecule that we're producing all the time anyway. But if we go through life sort of stuck in kind of a mode of suffering and really only knowing the waking state in our own little tiny, box person, little separate self-consciousness, we tend to engage in like fight or flight response a lot. We tend to fire lots of epinephrine and adrenaline, and that those things have a tendency of just overshadowing or perhaps eating up or reallocating resources that would go to the Soma. Anyways, it's a long story and with a lot of claims. What I will say is that of the way many, including myself, would start to experience Soma, two ways. It would start to be like a really interesting, sweet dripping from the roof of the mouth, kind of where people try to cut their tongue and to stick it up and sort of activate their pineal gland, which I think is completely unnecessary, honestly. I'm going to offend somebody who's done that. A wonderful, wonderful, sweet taste. And at first I was skeptical. I was like, well, what did I last consume? Let's make sure. It happened enough times, and including when I was just mainly having water, that I was like, well, this is fascinating, because it would, for me, taste an awful lot like honey. Straight up a drip of honey down the back of the throat. On a recent meditation retreat, one of the participants told me, I have this, there's Sprite, coming down. It's like, and the other thing is, which I hadn't known about, because I'd kind of known about that drip already. And that's also why I was a little bit skeptical. Am I just like seeing things here, was I would get what I'd call the bliss belly. And this was this sense that my whole stomach was just starting radiating waves of bliss or fundamental well-being. It like there was a sun of well-being, like SUN, sun of well-being down there that was just shooting out through all parts of the body. And it's like, I almost felt like I could levitate, from that. It felt like, well, that thing could just pull everything up. And then after experiencing that for a number of weeks or months or however it was, then, somebody also just offhandedly mentioned, in the transcendental meditation tradition, they say that the main site in the body in which Soma is produced is in the stomach as a byproduct of digestion. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Now, this Soma had more interested in some of the effects it would have. Now, these effects are, I'll call it the molecule of love, in a way. And this, I think I've experienced that even when I was in like the first blushes of sort of separate self infatuated love, and what happens there is, of course, is the grass is greener, the sky is bluer, the sounds that you hear are more mellifluous, unless they're not. Everything gets more subtle. Of of course, in sort of infatuated love, that's presupposed on a shaky foundation. But from the foundation of this growing deep anchoring in this silence, this melting of the separate little individual into the ocean, that's a sturdier foundation for this stuff to happen. And so what started to happen was of course visuals, became really crisp. Sounds became extraordinarily crisp and subtle. That's actually always been my dominant sense, and so it was fun to have that happen. I think there was probably a link with the telepathy that sort of got turned on, which I had fun experimenting with. I won't share all of those things because that brings in other people, and I don't think I should share certain things. But one example, and this was in, I think, month 4, really near the end of the training. Anyways, there was a big flood that came through Lincoln City. And we were in like an old 1930s church, and our teacher training room was down under the ground. And so we had to get out of there because the sump pump broke. That's right. So we had to get out of there, and we were all in new sleeping arrangements, just ad hoc, anywhere. And a very good friend of mine who was also had joined us for this course, he was sleeping just 4 feet away from me or something like that. And so I woke up in the wee hours of the morning. I woke up from a dream, and in the dream, he and I were having a conversation, and back and forth, telepathic. When I woke up, the conversation continued. I decided to experiment just to make sure. I wanted to experiment. I didn't have to say something. We were talking about the Great Pyramid of Giza, and I think. And I think the thought I sent him in the conversation was, something like, and in fact, the Pyramid of Giza was constructed well before the dynastic Egyptians. And he verbally, retorted, like, yep, amen to that, brother. Pyramid was constructed in 10,500 BC. I probably did his Alabama accent poorly right there, but that's why I did that. And that was, there were numerous occasions of that. We weren't paying attention to that kind of stuff. Like it was sort of a tight ship in some ways. I mean, not too restrictive. Our focus was to be going back into that undifferentiated samadhi. That was a focus. But a lot of this stuff came along for the ride, especially when Soma was happening. Then there's the love that just starts pouring out of the heart. That was wonderful. Like walking around, and it's as if you have. Now, this didn't happen all the time, because if you're stressed and you're going through something, yeah, probably not. But like having a vast floodlight of love pouring through you. Like it's not, you could say it's coming from in me, but it's also coming from in everything. And I'm just my body and the psyche and the little sense of I-ness that sort of encapsulate this is just like a thin little screen that is in the middle of this great love projection. That there is a sense of the world, in fact, being made out of love. And the sense of the world is just this dynamic play of love with these little players, apparent players, being moved around on top. And so what started to happen with that healing as well as it gets into something that's called samyama, which like the third pada of the third chapter, I should say, of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is dedicated to. And samyama is sometimes known as the bestower of union. And it's, maybe I won't get into the technical process because I'll probably fudge it right now. But I have to say, it's kind of like, it's predicated upon having a fairly consistent, silent mind. And again, when I say consistent silent mind, this is not something where you're holding the silence. That doesn't work well. That really doesn't work well. Don't do it. It's not an efforting it. It is just sort of a resting in that place, and it starts to become the default. And so with that as the default, there's this fascinating play that happens. Is you could be looking at your spoon at the dinner table, and you don't even make the love happen necessarily. You just look at it, and your consciousness zings into it and starts to see all the subtle aspects until it gets to the subtlest layer of the spoon, which is the subtlest layer of spoonness is just the transcendent, playing as a spoon. And that it's this process where that deep sort of vastness, the mystery, the silence, the words we can use for it, is sort of radar pinging itself. It's looking for itself in everything. And this is what leads to this melting into, we could call unity consciousness. This experience, this full experience of like, there's this infinite in here, but I can look at this tree. The tree's not just Maya. The people around me are not just Maya. It's not just bullshit. It's Brahman. And not from up here, it's from way deep down. It's like a relaxation. So for instance, you might be familiar with the way that Adyashanti puts it, where enlightenment or whatever could be described as a progressive relaxation of head, heart, and gut. That actually maps fairly closely, even experientially, onto sort of the transcendental meditation system that I was sort of brought up in via the Ashai's Ascension, which is sort of a break off of TM. Maps very well. I don't think any map is going to be perfectly linear. So maps are only so useful. Pretty useful actually, but only so much. There's always exceptions. There's always wiggles. Nobody quite goes in this stepwise sort of way. But it's mainly because it's like, why head, heart, and gut? What was that saying? Well, first it's head. So there's a crazy. We can start out with a really chaotic, neurotic mess up there, and the noise is just so unceasing that functionally it blocks us from the perception of our own infinite layer of the awareness. And so, like myself, who had many mystical experiences throughout childhood, you might be able to break through even with a neurotic mind and have even a day sometimes of just living in a genuine non-dual space, but it's not going to last forever, because that's a check that this can't cash. Oh, okay, so that needs to sort of relax, and of course this is, I'm pointing at a part of the body, but it's integrated within the whole thing, right? So as you're having that head relaxation happen, of course there's going to be all sorts of, the body needs to release things, the psyche needs to release things. It's a holistic thing in which everything is kind of trying to dump all these barnacles that have accreted over the years. So the head has to relax. When the head relaxes, it's as if then the heart has the wherewithal. That the heart has the wherewithal to go on its own search, and the heart starts to perceive the infinite. And that is a samyama practice. And that is a soma. What the soma is, you can think of it almost like if you could turn love into a woo-woo molecule, because I don't think nobody has in a lab found soma, though. Yeah, sometimes I think it sounds like DMT, but whatever. And so then the heart starts to go, and then at a certain point there's that's a profound healing and relaxation as well, because a lot of our primordial, that's not the right word, but a lot of our primal woundings are there. And then at some point, and it took a while for me to have this become a permanent thing. I had windows in teacher training, had some windows a few years later, long desert period. Then at some point, it's as if there's something way, way down just relaxes. And I didn't even know there was a tension there. So Adyashanti uses the word gut. And it's figuratively, metaphorically, I think it points in the right direction. Don't be looking in your stomach necessarily. But it's as if, I have to say, it was like way down in the body. And this happened 15 years. Oh no, what was 03, 04? So 14, 14 years I started having permanent experiences of this gut relaxation where, and what was the product of that was unity consciousness. The product of that was this interesting, very grounded, not so woo-woo. It reminded me of the perceptual range I had as a baby. And that was, I could actually remember, like, oh yeah, there were those few years where there were long stretches of those years in which whatever tension came at 4 or 5 or 6 or whenever it came, maybe 6, 7, wasn't there, and it was simply just the experience of this sense of, I knew that my crib is my crib and my body's my body, but there was a sense deeper that there was some kind of fundamental isness that I was, that fundamentally that was me. I knew my mother was my mother and I was in this body, but there was this fundamental isness that was experienced, this continuousness of being that can be experienced in parallel, right along with the most practical sense of knowing how not to get hit by a London taxi. Knowing how not to walk off a cliff with your body, and that's actually what we would call the Lesha Vidya, in the sort of like a very thin coating of separation, enough that you can practically get by in the world. This is going to lead me into other digressions. I have no idea how long this video has gone on. I think it's been quite a long video. And I didn't even I'm looking at my notes, not real notes, but looking at my notes, and I haven't even gotten to everything I could. So I think, though, I'll leave this video now and, come back to other aspects of how samadhi, how healing, how transformation unfolds, doing deep work, specifically within the space of a long retreat like that. And what we'll be covering, I think, in part 3 are some of the really interesting gradations of samadhi. Oh, no. On that point, I have to go on a little bit more, so sorry about that. On that point, and someone brought this up in the comments on the YouTube video, and I think it was wonderful, because it's one of my favorite experiences is a stupid one. and this is when you experience, when you can hear your own self snoring, and you're awake, and you don't necessarily even know it's you. So I have a story on this. I have a story on everything. And this was after the teacher training. This was, probably the next year. So we were all, maybe 14 of us, meditating, as we often did in the evenings in a big living room. And everyone knew that one of our members was snoring like a donkey. And so we all came up out of the meditation. And the man who was snoring came out, and his face was beet red. He was pissed off. And so he came out guns blazing, and he said, "Who the hell was snoring in my ear? It's not polite to snore in someone's ear." And we all kind of looked at him like this at the same time, wondering if he's, playing a joke. And then and then we're like, "You were." And then he's like, "Oh, oh, okay, sorry." Like that. And I thought in my mind right there, I thought, I'm the 21-year-old in this group. My nervous system's a Cadillac. I'll never have that experience where I don't know it's my own damn self snoring. And of course, at some point later, I didn't put up as much of a fight as him, but at some point later, I was like, "Wow, that was some pretty impressive snoring. Like, who was doing that?" It's like, "You." And I was like, "Oh my God, it happened to me." But earlier, it'd say in the retreat, that was so common. That is such a common, and actually that's a common thing. You don't need to be in some long retreat for that. You don't need to be in a long retreat for any of this, but actually it helps. It just helps a lot of us to just speed things up. That has been one of my actually the things I use as a marker that things are going along well for a meditator when they start catching themselves in that moment, because it's like some people have this idea in general that enlightenment should be some sort of radical change in the content of their life. You get these sometimes it is, there's part of that thing too, but you get these ideas and projections like, well, maybe I'll talk like this all the time, and whatever else, and I'll never be ruffled. I can't remember all my projections of like, oh man, I gotta, someday I'm gonna be like that, and they're nonsense, most of them, but most of them are nonsense. It's fundamentally not a change in content, it's a change in context. Okay, and it's not like going from I will forever cast away the surface aspects of life. I will no longer experience my sensory information. No, it's not like that. It's, I will be able to experience my sensory information, my world up here, but at the same time, I will not just be stuck at this level. I'll be experiencing all the way down. And at some point, as I become more and more comfortable living out this entire spectrum and integrating, what it ends up as is, this is another comment someone put, like, oh, why do that? You can do that when you're dead. You should live a full life now. And I understand where that's coming from, but I have to say, I have to push back on that a little bit. When you're living the entire context, when you're living the entire spectrum, that actually frees you up to live more fully than you would, because there are so many tensions that are fundamentally blocking your life force. There are so many things that are straitjacketing you. And here we get into one of the actually one of Osho's, and I may have some issues with Osho, but critiques I should say, but one of Osho's great neologisms, Zorba the Buddha. It is a fuller spectrum. Along the same lines, a lot of people get this idea that I don't know, enlightened beings or whatever are going to be like, I don't know, like manila envelopes, just, I am neutral as Switzerland all the time. Something like that. I have to say, what a pack of eccentrics. And but of course, eccentric in their own natural way. And that's it. It just simply, it's a project of removing, of course, all the marble that's been obstructing the angel. Anyways, I'll leave it with that. But I'm planning, I think, a third and a fourth part, and I'll really enjoy going into the sort of subtle gradations of samadhi. Unfortunately, I haven't fully translated the Buddhist notions of the jhanas, and I haven't made them fully commensurable with more Hindu-based understandings. That's something I haven't fully done. I might ask for some friends with help, because I know that there's some people who are interested in jhana experiences, and when I've read them, different explications, like, oh yeah, that's like there's pre-samadhi, and there's the start of samadhi near the end of the jhanas, and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, a rant, not in E minor. If you enjoyed this video, it's wonderful if you subscribed, put a like, make a comment. I'm trying to answer all the comments as much as I can, and that would be lovely. You can see my work is varied in this field, and I'll put it in the notes right under the video. So have a lovely day.